Yeah, I just make sure Matthew's ready.
Yeah. Yep. Good to go.
Okay, so let's call this meeting to order. Do the invocation first. Lord, please watch over us and allow us to make good decisions for the good citizens of this town, and continue to watch over us during the current COVID uprising again. Amen.
Amen.
Pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. First item on the agenda is installation of officers.
We talked about.
We have discussed this briefly. So if we can get some nominations for the different positions, that'd be great.
I guess I'd start with nominating William Fisher for board president.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Okay, I'll make a nomination that we make or vote for John Ortworth to be the vice president.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, and then I'd also like to make a motion that we nominate Bill Dees for secretary.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. Thank you. Anything else we need to do there, Courtney?
I think we're good there.
Okay, thank you. Has everybody read the consent agenda?
Yes.
Do we have a motion to approve that?
So moved.
Second?
All in favor? Aye.
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 I can't see who's there. Do we have any comments from the audience?
Mike
Yes.
Johnson.
Yes, we do. Mike is here.
Okay. Thank you, Mike. Go ahead and proceed.
I just wanted to say that I've been on the city council for about 12 years now, so I know that it's impossible to make everybody happy. And, the storm that we had, a week or so ago on a Thursday night, came through, took out my power like it did probably most of the city. And I've been a firefighter for 35 years, and I know what mutual aid's all about. And I know you guys had, different companies up here, helping out, and it's tremendous help to, something that you really can't take care of all by yourself in a timely fashion. And I just wanted to, thank those crews and recognize Jared. Jared was in my yard on a Saturday afternoon. I don't know, 4 or 5 o'clock, and I pointed him up the hill where a big tree had taken down everything but the pole. And, he told me, well, we probably won't get to it tonight. And, I was fine with that. I had a generator running my refrigerator, so I wasn't losing any food. And fortunately, when the big storms come by, it usually cools off a little bit so you could, get by with the windows open. But I don't know, probably 7:30 that night, I should see the Board of Public Works trucks going up the road, and I walked up and, they'd started, pulling the lines together, and, it was well after dark when they got my neighborhood back on. And I just wanted to pass along my thanks to Jared, his crew, and all those people from Townsend that, spent a couple days clearing the right of way. You know, in back of my neighborhood, it's really wooded back there, and you know, it had needed it for some time. So just wanted to thank everybody involved, and you know, appreciate what you do.
Is Jared present? Okay. Well, thank you, Mike. Any other comments from the audience?
No.
Okay. We'll let Darren take off with the general manager's report.
All right, I just have three quick things that I'd like to cover. Number one, earlier in this month, August 3rd, we had an election in which it failed to pass a referendum and that we would be able to have a tax that would help us to pay for some stormwater. That has failed. At the meeting, this last meeting of the city council, there was interesting that there was a citizen there that was quite anxious because she had recognized and saw that our stormwater system is not doing very well at all. And I would simply reiterate that. We have a significant issue with our stormwater failing, the underground systems, and we have some need of that funding. The other item that she said is that she was quite aggravated, I guess, expressing herself to the city council, et cetera, that there wasn't enough advertising, et cetera. At which time, Mr. Lemon pointed out that it was actually kind of illegal to do that in that way. So you have to manage between education and the politicking and asking for a vote. And I'm simply going to say that we're going to work our best to coordinate and cooperate with the city, but we are also going to start a significant outreach of teaching people what our condition of our stormwater is, the real need for that wastewater. Our staff is currently working on assessing what the condition is so that we can be very accurate, or at least more accurate. It'll be impossible to be specific, and yet we'll have a better idea of what we're going to need in funding. And so all of that goes together to say that we're aware of it. We're going to be actively pursuing that and helping the city, working very closely with them, again, coordinating, cooperating, and educating the public so that next time we can get that passed so that we can start doing the work we need to do for the stormwater. It is critical. Second item that I would like to point out, and very much appreciate the comments of thanks to our staff. On Thursday, August 12th, we had a heck of a storm come through. 80 mile an hour straight winds is what was reported. We had in one area up on Surrey Hill where there was a gentleman that said he saw a 80-foot tree get lifted up out of the ground, twist, turn, and be set down, not dropped, but actually kind of set down on top of our power pole, which then shattered and blew apart. And that wasn't the only one. There was at least 3 more in that same area. And frankly, it was very much all over the city. If you could have just one wind go through and just kind of rip it in half, that'd been great. But this was everywhere, very widespread. Initially, we had about 5,000 people out. By midnight, it was down to about 1,100. And then it gets kind of spotty because what happens is we don't know until people call in. And yet for the next several days, our crews, we had people from, again, the mutual aid agreement, which we have in place. We had people from Shelbina, Palmyra, Columbia, and even Rawls County came in and helped with us with a couple of poles that were essential. And Townsend, our tree trimmers, they doubled their staff, and they were just fantastic. And so I take my hat off to them. But the other thing that I got to see, and this was kind of nice, is the newcomer coming in. Don't blame the storm on me, please. But I will tell you this. I was absolutely impressed with everybody at the BPW that pulled together. You've got the people that behind the scenes, Jared and his men, absolute superheroes of what they did. Jared, the amount of hours, time, I don't know that he slept at all for the first 2 days. And he just, incredible. However, behind the scenes, you've got Matt Munslinger, who knows he could, he sits there and he hears the calls coming and he says, no, that's taken care of. No, we need him here. And he was able to, because of his understanding, help keep crews going the right direction. You got the SCADA folks that are taking the calls in, taking and translating that into actions and who goes where, giving that information to both Jared and to Matt, and then to Alex, who was able to help in that very specific items. You've got Matthew Jones, who has responsibilities for all of that SCADA, keeping the communications open and going, and absolutely under control and keeping those lines of communication open. And I just take my hat off to him of the magnificent job they've done. Then you have behind the scenes, the office staff, the ladies who kept, and it's not just ladies, but they keep the crews that have come in fed. They keep them into hotel rooms. They've done all of that work, again, hours and hours above and beyond what they normally do. And then you've got the ladies at the front that are receiving, and Ryan, who are receiving calls of complaints and issues, etc., that they are handling. And so it really is an all hands on deck. And then you've got Michaela, who's taking what little bit she gets from me, and she's putting that out there, plus more, so that the community's involved. And so it was, I was just absolutely impressed with what I called the dance of all of the staff that were here, how they worked together to support one another. And the final thing I'll say about it is there's times when there's some stress involved, okay? Stress gets very high, and I never heard one of them, although you could tell that they were stressed, were inconsiderate, were unkind, unprofessional in their communication with one another. And so all of those things, we should be absolutely impressed with our folks. And then it all falls on poor old Paul to make sure he captures all the dollar amounts and make sure it gets billed out correctly and paid for correctly. And it's his problem to come up with the money. So that's always a big plus. But the whole team, and it really is, and it was a terrible thing to happen, and yet I also see it almost, pull us together as a family of the HBPW that I'm very, very proud to be a part of it all.
Yeah, I would like to second that. I was out of town, and actually it was probably 24 hours before I knew anything what was going on when my wife said, "Look on Facebook, what's happening?" And because of that communication via Facebook, public media, and your comments updating the community, it was very good. And so I was more reassured that, okay, something happened and I didn't know what was going on. And that filled me in. I appreciate that and the staff. It really, really was impressive. It's our second go around this year, it seems like, knock on wood. We won't have that again for a while.
Thank you.
Totally agree. Yeah, we have become used to the excellent action.
Wonderful.
We really have.
Thank you. Thank you.
I thought so too. I mean, they did an amazing job. I got contacted by a couple people. I was getting the text updates from BPW, which really helped because I was able to kind of pass that on, plus watching the Facebook. But I had a couple of people call me and I said, well, it was kind of interesting because I felt like we had the citizens were kind of sitting back knowing everything was out. So they kind of sat back and waited for us to catch up a little bit. And then I had a couple of people call me and go, my electric's still not on. I'm like, by this time you called and reported it? And they said no. And I said, well, you need to call and let somebody know because it might not be something, major. It might be something with your personal property. So I thought the citizens really, I didn't take the calls and stuff, but I got so much positive feedback about how well you guys did. I was truly amazed. My electric was only out for maybe 10 hours. I think I was probably one that come on at midnight when quite a few, I'm on Magnolia. So you guys did an amazing job. So impressive.
Thank you.
Great job.
And so they did great. However, we know we can improve. Part of that was we need to make better communication even than we did already. And we've asked for after action reviews. So we've got great response we're asking from all of our staff to give us that information. We're going to be looking at it. We've already gotten some great stuff where we can improve the next time and make sure that we do better. So we know we made mistakes. Everybody does. If you're working, you're gonna. But we can improve a little bit, and we're going to do just that. So thank you. Third item, we just wanted to quickly cover the COVID. We recognize that COVID at the hospital is going up. There's more people going there. One of the positives that I would simply step out and offer to you is that we are taking some sampling down at the wastewater treatment plant. They're doing it throughout the state, and it actually shows for us that those numbers are actually coming down just a little bit. So I think that there can be hopefully some optimism. However, with that, we're going to continue to err on the side of caution. We'll use we'll do the social distancing, and we'll be wearing the masks as we do, just to make sure that our staff is all healthy and continuing to be able to come to work. So, last thing, I said 3 here. Let me give you 4. Please make sure you take and pay attention to page 13 on the board packet. That we had the Kids in Motion activity. We took several of our youth, and they went to the water treatment facility. And it was a very good event. Kayla helped organize, make that happen, and it was just fantastic. And so I'd ask you to pay attention to that. We've got a really good outreach going on in that. So that concludes my report.
Bill, that would then move us to operations manager report,
Yes.
unless you're asleep.
How you doing, Matt?
Good afternoon. I'd just like to build on what Darren said. We had great response from not only our staff, but also those crews coming into town. Like he alluded to, we had even the rural co-op came in and helped us set poles, which I don't know has ever been done before. So we're building those relationships with the other entities in the area. For the second storm that we've had this year, we had no incidents other than the one minor one, no injuries. So that's to be commended as well.
Can I expand on this just a little bit?
Yes,
Darren wasn't here for February, and February was
January.
Ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
You talking about that as the
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
I thought you were talking about 1 month ago, but no.
No.
January was unbelievable. Ice storms, everything down everywhere, cold as can be, and they did the same thing. It's great.
But some of the things that were actually used during this event were a result of the January ice storm. Matthew Jones and Emily had worked on putting together a tracking system for when people call in. Anybody can fill out the report. It goes into one spreadsheet so we can track items. We actually are supposed to have a meeting maybe later this week or next week concerning it. So we're continuing to learn from these events. We're looking at outage indication software or some way to indicate whether or not Bill has power or John has power, or where the big clusters, some type of visual so that we can focus on getting those large areas back on a little quicker. And so that's something we're continually working on and working towards through our GIS, through our meter swaps, making sure we get good connectivity in our map so that we know where a certain person's fed and, what behind what fuse or what transformer so that we can look at those areas that maybe we can get on a little quicker with minimal work. To lead into our projects, again, water, there are no current projects. Paxton Street area, we've had some calls and some issues down there over the past 5 or 6 months. This is something that we had a I&I study done on in, I think it was 2009, 2010. We thought we had the issue corrected until late last year when we started getting high-level alarms again at the lift station. During an event that happened, I think it was in March of this year, March or April. Had a guy call for the first time that we've ever recorded and said he couldn't flush. And so we went down there, we cameraed the whole area that is served by that lift station. We found some services that were abandoned, houses were demolished. And so we've been working over the past few months to do that. In the last 2 months, we've covered 15 services. We've also identified a couple manholes that we need to seal up a little tighter around the lid or in areas that are flood prone. And then this last event happened, I think it was the second week of July, or about that time. There was actually a video that we got, And what we think is happening is because that's kind of the convergence of both Bear Creek and Mills Creek that is getting water backing up. We got to looking, and it's in a floodway or a floodplain on the FEMA flood maps, and that area is what's being affected. And what we actually saw was, we think, flood water backing in, because this last rain event where this video was taken, we did hit a high level on our lift station, but not anything that should affect our customers in that area. So we're continuing to work with them to identify the problem, but we think it's more of a flooding issue rather than a sewer inundation issue. On the storm sewer side of things, North Street, working with the Corps of Engineers, again, they're supposed to pay for the replacement of the storm sewer from basically the dry side, toe of the levee, up to the alley there at Bridge Street. That is scheduled to begin October 1st, and they've got a contractor under contract. There has been some preliminary discussions about if the contractor's available, and due to the low river levels, about going ahead and getting that started, but I've not heard back from them. Pepping Stone and Box still doing the design phase of the North Street storm sewer from that point all the way up to the old bridge approach. They're 85-90% done on those plans. Hopefully within the next couple of months we'll be able to present those. And then also as part of that, Pepping Stone and Bach did a condition assessment from on up Mark Twain Avenue all the way up to the pool. They found one issue about the Rock Street access there off Mark Twain Avenue that we've plated off at this point, and we may have one other issue that came about with this last rain event last week, and so, or 2 weeks ago now. And so we're going to investigate that a little bit more. On the electric side, on the tie line between Oakwood and Southside substations, we've had that project go out for a bid. We received 2 bids on August 11th. It'll be discussed later in the board packet. And then the fence substation connection, we're continuing to work with our engineer to get the design work completed. We got 30% plans in-house here a week or two ago, and we're going through those as time permits to work out any issues that we have. So that's all I've got, unless you all have any questions. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. We'll move on to the financial report. Paul, you're up.
All righty, good afternoon. So we're on to a new fiscal year. July is the first month of fiscal year 22, so a little bit of excitement with that. And we can go ahead and start here with the balance sheet. So you'll notice right off the bat, unrestricted cash increased quite a bit, about $1.2 million. One thing we haven't really talked about yet this board meeting is that the sale of the generators, it does seem like a while ago, did occur in early July. So we did have a significant influx of cash that came in with that sale, which obviously immediately we turned right around and paid off our note. But we were able to recognize a pretty significant gain that we'll talk about here in just a minute. So that was the big increase in cash there. Our payables and accruals didn't do much. Long-term debt did decrease significantly. As you may recall, most of our debt service payments are due January 1st and July 1st. And so those were all the ones that were due were recognized there in July. And then I did mention that we paid off our lease on the diesel generators. So overall, total assets were about 2.4% less than last month and about a 0.5% less than a year ago. The reason for the decrease there is obviously with the sale of those generators, we wrote those assets off and they're no longer on our books. So I mentioned, that the sale kind of caused us to recognize a pretty significant gain. So essentially, we have a net book value for that asset that's on our books, which essentially says we've purchased this asset for this cost, And then every single month, we're taking a little bit of chunk off that called depreciation. And we're saying that it's not quite worth what it was when we purchased it. And that amount that you've taken off at a point in time is called the net book value of that asset. And so at the time of the sale, which was about $5 million, those assets were worth about $3.2 million. And so we were able to recognize about a $1.8 million gain on that sale. And so reflecting that of the income statement was a little bit different than what you're used to. And Darren and I actually kind of talked about it a little bit. And so I can pass these out here real quick, but this will just give you a better idea of what it'll look like. All right, one bill in there. Basically what I did was I broke the gain out separately so you can see it. And so tracking that for the rest of the fiscal year will be a little bit difficult, but I'll try to separate it out so you can see it. So essentially, utility-wide net income was about $1.5 million more than what we had budgeted for July, which obviously was due to that significant gain that we recognized. And so if you take that gain out, we're actually tracking right about where we had budgeted in the electric fund, which is very good. That's where we want to be. On the water and sewer fund side, both of those funds significantly underperformed their budgeted levels by about 71%, 81% respectively. Primarily, that was due to lower revenues in the water fund and higher operating expenses in the sewer fund. And so we'll continue to monitor those funds as we go forward. Current month actual compared to the same month last year, utility-wide net income was about $1.5 million more than the same month a year ago, again because of that gain. Really the main reason I think for the other funds underperforming was that July was a 3-pay month. And so when we budget our labor expenses, obviously we split that and just divide it out by 12 months. And so whenever you have a 3-pay month, you've kind of got that extra labor expense in there, which was really the main factor in those two funds. Kilowatt hour sales in the electric fund were down about 6.3% from the same month a year ago. And so we had a streak going there of about 5 straight months of increased kilowatt usage, and so that streak's finally come to an end. So we'll definitely continue to monitor that as well. So first month in the fiscal year, nothing too alarming yet. We'll keep a close eye on the sewer and the water funds and kind of see where those track throughout the rest of the year. But like I said, nothing to be alarmed at quite yet. I wanted to point out, if we scroll on down, see it's page 24, that debt service coverage ratio that we've been looking at. If you recall, it's required to be 1.25 per our bond covenants. Right now we're at about 1.66 in the water fund and 1.98 in the sewer fund, and so those did go from green to yellow just in my mind. Basically, I've set that as something to monitor a little bit more closely. But again, as long as we're over that 1.25, we're fine. And another thing is, I imagine that the covenant itself, I'd have to go back and look at it, but it would most likely be based on a trailing 12-month. And so if you go back our trailing 12 months, we're going to be more up in that 2 to 3 or even 4 range, which would be definitely fine to meet those covenants. Everything else on there is pretty standard. I did add, at Darren's request, a column for a variance percentage from the budget back on the income statement. That'll kind of just show it a little bit easier how we're tracking with the budget line by line. I kind of touch on some of the highlights, but that way it just kind of delineates that a little bit easier. Only other piece I've got for my financial report is an update on the municipal utility emergency loan. We did receive those proceeds of $750,000 last Thursday. They did hit our account. And so the plan for those, again, is basically just to replenish those loss reserves associated with those purchase power prices and costs that we paid back in February. And so that's essentially what we've done. Obviously, we've got some renewal projects coming up here in the near future. We had a significant storm that came through that is going to be quite costly. Those proceeds will kind of go towards that a little bit, and then I'll obviously go towards the financing of the Oakwood tie line. And again, just as a reminder, that's a 5-year loan at no interest with semi-annual payments associated with it. So $75,000 a payment, which those begin, I believe next spring is when those will begin. So all went well with that, and I'm glad that I was able to go through and help us out pretty much immediately. Any questions as far as the financial report goes?
Paul, a suggestion and not a recommendation, because I'm not in that world. When you look through a financial accounting of a corporation, they'll always have a subnote for extraordinary items.
Mm-hmm.
So if you might have a way to remove that net proceeds from the sale of the generators from your activity, and just footnote that when you if you would take it out of income and just show it as a subnote, that may make your operating revenue look more like it was originally budgeted, because we didn't budget in directly for any net proceeds. Such as a suggestion, not a recommendation, is all.
Right. No, that's a great idea. I think, like you said, it's definitely not operating. I mean, It is and it isn't. It wasn't budgeted.
Yeah, and our budgets were typically put together for tracking mainly just operational stuff.
Right.
So just so that you don't have to go through the repeating of the extraordinary item for the whole year, definitely track it. But
yeah,
anyway.
No, I appreciate that.
Thank you, John. Any other comments? Hearing none, we can move on to Paul. You're still up. Stormwater loan principal payment deferral.
Alrighty. Yep. So this is the same fund that the electric fund loaned to the stormwater fund to kind of pay for some of these stormwater events that we've had over the past few years. This originally came about in August of 2017, directly after the City Council assigned the BPW the task of managing that underground system. Since then, there's been a lot that's occurred and went on. This loan was actually increased from $1 million to about 1.67 last October in association with Martin Street, which was another stormwater failure that we had to take care of. And so at that time, we didn't extend the length of the loan, but obviously the interest payment went up with that increase in the loan. And so I've got the original loan agreement on there, as well as the modified loan agreement from last October. At this time, the Stormwater Fund does not have a revenue source or any way of paying the electric fund back. And so we're asking that we go ahead and defer that principal payment another year. I have been paying the interest from the Stormwater Fund back to the electric fund, but there's not a whole lot of funding left after Martin Street's been completed and everything else in that Stormwater Fund. So final maturity is August 1st of next year. There's a lot that can happen between now and then. But at this time, we are just requesting that the board move to defer the August 1st, 2021 principal payment of $100,000.
I'd definitely
Do I hear a motion?
I'd definitely make that motion.
Second?
All in favor?
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay.
All right. Paul, I think you're still up.
Alrighty, thank you. This one's a little bit similar, and I can let Matt touch on any of the holes I miss here, but we've got the business park out there, and those preliminary designs for that park called for a stormwater detention lake to be built, and in doing so, the Corps of Engineers kind of assessed that would destroy some stream water habitat there that was already there in existence, and that lake was basically going to be designed with both recreational and aesthetic elements. Potentially putting fish in there and things like that. And so when the Corps of Engineers required us to replace that lost stream bank area, there was a letter of credit that was set up through F&M Bank that essentially said if we started that work and didn't complete it, then the Corps of Engineers could get that money from the bank. And so there's kind of two pieces here. There's that letter of credit that the Corps of Engineers would be able to be guaranteed that funding, and then the line of credit is the funding that the F&M Bank would provide to us if that were ever needed. And so what we're asking here today, in that was created in 2017, and it's a 1-year renewal, and so it matures in I believe September 9th, and so we're asking to go ahead and renew that for another year. Our permit under that detention lake is good for quite a few more years yet, and so we just continue to plan to renew that every year until a decision is made about what to do at that business park. So at this time, management is requesting the board to extend the line of credit an additional year and go ahead and authorize that document, which I do have here in front of me.
So, Paul, has anything been spent to restore the stream? I'm not familiar.
What it
with
was
sorry.
because we're going to take out the stream bank to build the lake, we have to basically improve 3 times as much stream bank somewhere else, or we can buy into a piece of property where that's what they've done with that property is made improvements. As part of the permit, we had to guarantee that we would follow through should we start down the actual construction of the lake. And that's what this line of credit. But we've not spent any money anywhere else other than the permitting process.
So it's just a future guarantee that the rules are going to be followed?
Yeah, all it's saying is if we do decide to go forward with the construction of the lake, that we would do the stream bank mitigation.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't do it, then they come after the money to do it.
Makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Any other further discussion on that?
The cost to us is,
Zero.
Zero.
Yeah, I didn't mention
Until we start doing something.
until we start doing something.
Yeah.
Currently it's 0.
And you're looking for a
Do
motion?
we need a motion on that, Courtney?
Yes.
Do I hear a motion?
Motion to extend the line to extend the credit line.
Yeah, second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. You're still up, Paul.
All right, thank you. I don't want to spend a whole ton of time on this. You've got it there in front of you and can always reference back if needed. But Bill and I had talked about, some of the events that we've had here recently and just kind of our cash reserves and investments and things like that and how we're kind of making some of those decisions. And so I did want to give an update. And I'd like to do, this at least annually anyway, just so you guys are aware of everything. And so some backstory on our cash reserve policy is somewhere around 10 years ago, the BPW kind of started building cash and didn't really have a good plan of where do we invest and how are we limited and things like that. And so UFS is Utility Financial Solutions, a very well-known player in that game for utilities. They were retained to go ahead and kind of assess our situation and put together what they thought would be the best policy, kind of based on standard industry practice and things like that. And so I did provide that report that they put together for us. And essentially they break out their formula on 4 main factors. And O&M, operating and maintenance expense, plays a role in that. So about 12.3% of your annual O&M budget is one piece of that puzzle, and they did assume there a 45-day lag between when we bill our customers and when we receive payment. Now, keep in mind this was back in 2019, so that most likely has went up, that lag with COVID and things like that. However, it's the best we have to go off of right now. The next piece would be historical investment in fixed assets. And so basically all the fixed assets that we have on our books in our system, that net book value that I talked about, you do 0.5% of that total. Debt service payments, it's going to be 90% of your estimated debt service payments, or not estimated, your actual debt service payments for the year. That's weighted the highest because we don't really have any wiggle room there. Those debt service payments have to be made or to be an extremely negative impact to our credit. And then the last piece is 20% of our 5-year capital improvement program. We get that in front of you in March and April of every year. And then 20% of that is what you would add to your cash reserve total. So they presented that policy at that time. The board went ahead and adopted it. That was in July of 2019. And so I've included the actual policy itself and then the UFS report that they put together that kind of went into a little bit more detail on those items. And then at the very bottom here, I've got our actual cash reserve calculations. These are done annually right after we do kind of that capital program as well as our operating budget to kind of lay out what the changes are and things like that. Obviously, I could even redo it again now that we've paid off the electric note. However, it wouldn't really be prudent since we're going to be taking on additional financing here in the near future anyway. But you can see that calculation there and how it's broken out. And sorry, it's a little small, but the required reserves there aren't totaled. But if you go down to the next page, it does list our minimum reserves there for each fund. And so that's the current policy and what we're following. We are above our minimum requirements on all of our funds there, and we've obviously seen some pretty significant fluctuation, not significant, but some fluctuation in the last few months with just the storms and the polar vortex and the proceeds from some of the different funding sources that we've had. And so we've been able to manage things pretty well, fortunately, and I think this policy has a lot to do with that. And so I am thankful for the board members and members of management at that time that put this in place. And on that, I'm just willing to take any questions, any thoughts you have. Feel free to sit on this too and email me at any time once you've had more time to digest it and go over it. But
Yeah, I'd just comment that I asked Paul, there's two sides to that equation, and he's going to address the second half shortly, but the cash reserve policy and then the investment of those cash reserves. It was confusing to me. I mean, we've got a great spreadsheet. It's the red one, the green and the yellow. It has lots of colors on it. And when I first looked at that, I had to kind of wade through the understanding of, and I'm still doing that. But this report that they put together really was pretty impressive to me because you can follow the calculations and understand why each fund had its own set amount, and tracking that month over month is very critical. And then I appreciate you doing that and sending that along, and the past board. I mean, in 2019, somebody was thinking ahead. That's before the ice storm and before the wind storms that we're starting to have that put us at risk. So I was pretty impressed that it was that detailed, and Paul got it to me very quickly, and I appreciate that. And the other side is the investment side, so I'll defer.
Any other comments or questions?
This is Darren. I'd just like to make a real quick comment. I've worked with UFS in the past. We had the very same thing, a reserve minimum. And one of the things that in industry-wide, we have a 12.3% for your budgeted operating expenses. That's to cover in case you had something happen to your system where you couldn't bill, you couldn't collect that money from your customers for 45 days. This is relatively small compared to many of the others that are out there that I think COVID has brought to light. The storms that are occurring that we recognize are a little more consistent these days, that a lot of people have stretched it to greater numbers. And so I will watch that, and I just share that with you to put that in the back of your mind, that maybe that's one of those numbers we might want to expand on for a little more conservative cushion for problems in the future.
Yeah. Certainly what happened in Texas during the ice storm and even in this state, there are some impacts there. Obviously, we got 750,000 because the state said, we know that utilities got hurt.
And so you've got, again, Florida, you've got the hurricanes that hit there. Used to be that you could rely on FEMA coming in and replacing those dollars in a hurry within months. They're now talking years before you get reimbursed for those dollars. And so again, that number, we've seen a lot of those numbers go up and increase in percentage because of those trends. So just, again, no request or change today, but a consideration.
Okay, Paul, do you have anything else?
I do not on the cash reserves policy.
Okay, we can move on to the investment policy.
Alrighty. And so when we have reserve funding, you got to make a decision of what to do with it. You can't just let it sit there and not make any kind of return. And so we do have our investment policy that was established quite a while ago. And a couple other things I want to touch on with this is that F&M Bank currently is our depository bank, and that's through the city actually. Is who that agreement is with. And so all of our debt service related accounts, or the majority of our debt service related accounts are with F&M. We do have some accounts with UMB Bank, and then we utilize Commerce Capital Markets to assist us with brokering some CDs in which we invest in. And so F&M also has been willing to take on some CDs for us, and they've offered very competitive rates as well. As we sit right now and kind of based on this policy, it's very, very conservative. It essentially mirrors the state of Missouri Treasurer's Office policy, in which you can only invest in very certain types of investments, certificates of deposit, treasury bonds, things like that. And additionally, those investments cannot stretch out more than 5 years. And the reason for that is because you always want to have investments that are constantly maturing in case we have an ice storm, in case we have a significant event like this. You've got some of that cash that's a little bit liquid that you can kind of pull from without taking a penalty whenever you take out a CD early. And so that's kind of the reason for that. A few years ago, we used to keep a very, very large portion of our reserves in a sweep account, which was an account that would be swept into daily, and it was making a pretty good return, 3.5%, 4%, sometimes even 4.5%. Sweep accounts like that have very, very much diminished here in the last few years in return, and so a couple of years ago, maybe not even that long, the decision was made to put some of those reserve funds into additional securities or certificates of deposit. And so when you scroll down there, you can see the total listing of pretty much all of our cash and investments that we've got right now. That pooled cash would be our main operating account. It always has $2 million in it. And so anything under that amount at the end of business would be, we would take cash from the sweep account and bring it in to get us back up to that $2 million range. Anything over $2 million would be taken out of that account and put into the sweep account, just to make a little bit of interest in some of those overnight funds. And so you can see there that the sweep account is a little bit in excess of the operating account, which is obviously the sweep account is very, very liquid. We can pull from that funding whenever we need to, and so that's been very nice to have here recently with some of these larger events, and because CDs just really aren't making very much return right now. And so I've got everything else listed out there. All of our debt service accounts that you can see are just regular checking accounts that we transfer in and out from whenever those debt service payments are needed. Our pooled reserves there with Commerce Capital Markets, that's basically those CDs that I was talking about. We've got a number of them, somewhere between 15 and 20 there, that are just all of our reserves put together in those CDs, and those are constantly maturing every month. And one thing I should mention is that Bill was a little bit concerned that all of these decisions were kind of falling on me a little bit, and I'll definitely say that we do use Commerce Capital Markets to kind of assist us with some of that, as well as our financial advisor Joy Howard to kind of keep us up to speed on some of these rates and things like that. And then Commerce will make suggestions of certain CDs to invest in and things like that. And so I'm definitely not all on my own by any means when it comes to managing these funds. So one thing I also wanted to point out was, and as many of you may know, the rates on CDs right now are pretty dismal. I believe the last time we looked at it, our overall rate of return is right around 1%, maybe even a little less on some of those things. And so we are a little bit handicapped in terms of what we can do with those funds and exploring additional avenues, which is a little bit unfortunate. And so, that with inflation being as high as it is right now, it makes it difficult to to see those funds making such a little return. But that's really what I've got in terms of the investment policy and where those funding sources are. And again, happy to take any questions today, or if you have anything else or suggestions or anything like that here, feel free to shoot me an email or give me a phone call.
Paul, are we under any state regulations, being a city entity, that reserves must be kept in a certain place, or do we just have the policy in place just so that things aren't changing every single month?
I'm going to defer that to James here a little bit and see what he knows on that. I know, obviously we do have the policy in place, but in terms of modifying that to give us, a little bit more stretch, I think, we've kind of discussed a little bit, being a chartered city, we do have a little bit of flexibility there, and I'm not sure how much or how privy you are to some of those mandates or.
Not without looking it up.
Right.
Yeah, that's something, we've talked about with just seeing how low that return is. Do we have any wiggle room there?
Yeah.
The easy route, obviously, was just to mirror the state of Missouri's municipal funding suggestions. However, I think that's something we're going to be looking into here to see whether or not we do have some flexibility there and what we can do.
Yeah, my concern was that we were being too conservative. In other words, to our detriment, particularly when you start looking against inflation. I'm old enough to remember, 8% inflation, 12% inflation, 18% way back when. When those things start happening, you're literally throwing money out the door because you're being too conservative. I'm not suggesting that we get out there and start brokering stuff and speculating, but we need to at least look at that procedure, and Paul's already started it, and I appreciate it. The front side of the equation, the back side of the equation. We had the reserves. Are we being prudent with those tax reserves, and not just saying, okay, we're burying it in the backyard, and it's hurting us. And if you start running those numbers about what it could be versus what it is, it gets a little, those numbers start to get pretty big quickly, saying, okay, are we being too conservative? So anyway, we're looking at it. I do appreciate it.
Are you spread around enough that you're FDI insured?
Right, yeah.
Policy says.
Yeah, that's another thing. That's probably the biggest piece that our broker at the,
250,000.
right,
Institution.
per institution. Yep, so that's something that he really helps us with in making sure that we meet that. And even if we have a CD that comes, due and we're going to invest in one in a few days, he'll, take out a short-term whatever, piece of paper or investment paper to kind of cover that and make sure everything's insured. And so he's very good at working all that for us.
Okay, anything else on investments?
That's all I've got, Bill. And again, feel free to shoot me any questions or suggestions as they pop up.
Okay. Thank you, Paul.
Yep, thank you.
Matt, I believe you're up.
As I alluded to earlier, we did receive bids on the Oakwood to Southside tie line project on the 11th of August. We did have two bidders on that, and those two bids were roughly $3.2 and $6.5 million. Engineer's estimate was around $2.4 million. We did get a few more things included in with the bids. But to kind of go back and give you some background back on that project, it's always been a high priority to get a ring loop feed 34.5 kV loop all through town that would allow us to feed any of our substations from two different directions. With the retirement of the 73 line upon the completion of the Finn connection, it further pushed this to the top of the projects to complete. And so back in January of 2020, we started down the road of designing this. With COVID and everything, it kind of delayed some of the progress on the project. It also left us kind of in a quandary on when to go out for bid because of labor shortages, material prices. And so we finally pushed the project out to bid the end of June, and then worked with contractors through meetings and such, and actually had to delay the bid opening for 2 weeks so they could get material prices quoted to them. We also addressed another of their concern that long lead times on getting these materials once they're ordered. We actually pushed substantial completion out a whole month. Instead of completing it around the 1st of April of 2022, we pushed it out to the 1st of May to give them more time to get the materials in and get them installed. The 74 line is scheduled to go offline March of next year, and so we're just expanding the gap of exposure should we lengthen that completion time. So again, we put it out to bid, tried to address as many of the concerns as we could leading up to the bid opening. But based upon the bids that we received, we would like to just table the decision on this until next month. Bids are good for 60 days as we look at some other options before we go with this higher price than we anticipated. But I just want to bring it before you, that way you're aware of it. We did have the bid opening. We are looking into it, and we're hopefully come back with a few more options next month.
It's probably not worthwhile getting into what you speculate the options are, so I'm not even going to broach that, but it makes sense, if it makes sense to you.
So you want a motion to table?
Yes. Bear second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. All right. Jared, I believe you're up.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just come to you guys with the surplus of our backyard easement machine. It's within our 10-year rotation of our vehicles. We try to keep all of our line vehicles in a 10-year rotation. And I did contact the city with their interest, like we do with all of our other all of our other surplus requests. They didn't have any interest at the time, so we're going to get all the proper documentation together with approval to go ahead and surplus this machine on Purple Wave. Basically, it's a government auction site, like we have with all of our other surplus stuff.
What
Have
is
any questions?
What is a backyard easement machine?
It is a track machine that has 2 buckets on it. This one has 2 buckets, and it's a digger derrick. It goes through a 36-inch gate, lifts about 5,500 pounds. It's what we use to set poles in backyards and work stuff in backyards.
You've told me about that before, yeah.
So that we to kind of bootstrap. The REC has basically a similar machine, but they have it on a skidster. So they've got a grapple, and they dig a hole, and then they pick it up and set the pole. And where we had these pole replacements, it was going to be kind of difficult to get our easement machine in, and it was much quicker, much easier with the skidster to get in there. And the yard was already tore up because a big, massive tree fell down. And so we just used their equipment, and it helped us out a lot. It saved a lot of time. Backyard easement machines are, they crawl, they're really slow. So skidsters are much quicker. Any questions?
So the process you're looking for now is to put it out.
I just need
is-
approval to go ahead and surplus the old unit. We have a replacement unit here that had been approved in budget previous.
So moved to put it out.
Yeah, second, sure. Makes sense.
Do
All
we
in
have a
favor?
second?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. James, any comments?
I have no comments.
Okay. So,
It didn't turn green. I didn't think it was gonna.
so we need to have a motion to move into closed session and invite the appropriate personnel to that.
Under closed section, pursuant to section 610.021 of the Missouri Sunshine Law, the meeting shall convene in closed session to discuss litigation, real estate, and contracts.
And subparts 1, 2, and 12, I presume.
And subparts 1, 2, and 12 to be included.
I'll second the motion.
We have to
All in
include-
favor?
hang on.
Wait,
We have to include them.
you need to say who you're going to
Include-
include.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I thought he said that.
All board members.
Board members, Mr. Gordon,
Me
and Matt, and city attorney.
Jared Stewart.
Jared, okay,
And myself.
Courtney.
And Courtney.
Second.
All right.
Second.
Now
Second.
that we've heard the second and all of the members coming, do we have would everybody like to vote on that?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.